All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into a 6,000-year history surrounding what is arguably the most widespread ancestral being in Aboriginal Australian mythology, the Rainbow Serpent. We're going to explore deep prehistoric rock art, profound religious traditions, and later on, some very modern cultural controversies.
So let's just address the elephant in the room right off the bat and set up our entire investigation. Is the famous rainbow serpent actually real? Or, is the popular image we all have in our heads just completely wrong? Because when you hear rainbow serpent, you probably picture exactly what you've seen in children's books or pop culture. But as you'll see, the actual history is so much more fascinating than the simplified version.
Well, as you can see, there is a literal massive gap between Western myth and Indigenous reality. On one side, we've got this Western simplification, a single, benevolent, rainbow-colored god that supposedly all of Aboriginal Australia worships. But the Indigenous reality? It's actually made up of hundreds of distinct, incredibly localized, and sometimes very dangerous water deities. It's definitely not one unified god. It's a vast, diverse family of complex beliefs.
Section 1. An anthropological invention?
So here's where it gets really interesting. Back in 1926, a British anthropologist named Alfred Radcliffe-Brown published a paper that, kinda changed everything. He essentially surveyed stories from across the continent and flattened the incredibly diverse, rich traditions of roughly 400 distinct Aboriginal nations into one neat, palatable Western concept. He literally coined the English term rainbow serpent, and it just stuck.
I mean, just look at this list. There was absolutely never just one unified deity across the continent, and the linguistics totally prove it. In Arnhem Land, you have Yurlungur, a great father figure. For the Kunwinshku peoples, it's Nalyod, who is sometimes depicted with a crocodile head. You've got the Waggle in Western Australia, the fierce Wonambi in Central Australia, and Gorialla up in Queensland. They have different genders, different attributes, and completely different rules.
And this quote right here hits the nail on the head. Scholars today actually call this process intellectual colonization. Basically, by domesticating these incredibly complex, deeply localized Indigenous traditions to fit into our neat Western theological assumptions about a singular creator god, we lose the rich, specific realities of these cultures. It was, for all intents and purposes, an anthropological synthesis that oversimplified an entire continent.
Moving on to Section 2. Ancient rock art evidence.
Okay, the sense of scale we're dealing with here is just staggering. You'll sometimes hear people throw around the idea that the rainbow serpent myth is 50,000 years old. But if we look at the hard archaeological data, the giant Wonambi snake went extinct roughly 40,000 years ago, and early mythical art appeared about 12,000 years ago. But the first actual serpent-like beings? They don't emerge until the Yam figure style, which is roughly 4,000 to 6,000 years ago.
And when we actually look at those ancient Arnhem Land rock paintings from the Yam figure style, they don't just show a simple snake. No way. They depict these wild, shape-shifting, composite creatures. It's like a giant puzzle. They combine a snake body with a macropod or kangaroo head, the wings of a flying fox, and even human features. This directly mirrors the oral traditions that describe these beings as powerful shapeshifters, not just really big pythons.
Let this number really sink in for a second. 6,000. We are looking at roughly 6,000 years of continuous mythological tradition documented in both rock art and living oral history. That makes this arguably the longest unbroken religious narrative in the entire world. It's an absolute marvel of human cultural endurance.
Section 3. Masters of Water and Law.
Now, people are always trying to link the myth to a single real-life animal, and we can run through the biological candidates pretty quickly. You've got the amethystine python, huge and iridescent, but not really aquatic. The water python has that rainbow sheen and lives in the water. The taipan is highly venomous and perfectly models the destructive power of the myth. But honestly, no single real snake completely matches the supernatural attributes of the deity. It's more of a symbolic blend of the environment's most powerful elements.
And speaking of the environment, the functions of these beings map perfectly to literally surviving in Australia. In an arid landscape where sudden floods and devastating droughts completely dictate human survival, these beings function as the ultimate arbiters of life and death. They're creators of geography, carving out rivers. They're givers of life through water. But look at points 3 and 4. They are strict lawgivers and a destructive force who will actively swallow or drown anyone who breaks sacred laws. They demand absolute respect.
Now, let's zoom out for a second. The Aboriginal creator beings are an entirely independent creation,
totally separate from Mesoamerica's Quetzalcoatl, the Native American Alwanyu, or the biblical Leviathan. Yet across all these completely disconnected cultures, humans globally connect serpents to water control. Why is that? Well, because the sinuous winding path of a river naturally looks exactly like a snake. Plus, snakes shedding their skin naturally symbolize renewal. It just shows this fascinating universal human cognitive pattern.
Finally, Section 4, Modern Echoes and Appropriation.
Now take a look at this stark contrast here between the original geographically restricted traditions and modern reinterpretations. In Aboriginal cultures, these beings are actively sacred, highly restricted, territorial, and governed by strict kinship protocols. But in modern reinterpretations, especially in New Age spirituality, the serpent is so often stripped entirely of its cultural context. It gets marketed as this generic global symbol for electromagnetic energy or Kundalini awakening, which is miles away from its origins.
A really prime example of this exact cultural tension is the former Rainbow Serpent Festival. It was this massive, incredibly popular electronic music and arts event down in regional Victoria that ran from 1997. But it was officially renamed in 2025 following sustained criticism from Aboriginal communities. They argued that a non-Indigenous event using their sacred ancestral being as the theme for a party was a clear-cut case of cultural appropriation.
This quote powerfully captures the stance of a lot of Indigenous scholars and elders on this issue. They really want the world to understand that these beings are not generic, public commodities just available for anyone to use. They are living, actively maintained traditions tied to specific lands, specific laws, and specific people. Taking the imagery without adhering to the protocols removes the very essence of what the being actually is.
Which brings us to the end of this explainer. And I want to leave you with a pretty massive question to ponder. Where exactly is the ethical line between universal inspiration and cultural appropriation? How do we appreciate and learn from a magnificent 6,000-year-old tradition without erasing the specific living cultures that actually maintain it today? It's a really complex balance, but definitely a conversation worth having.